let's look at sorcerer. Sorry.
We
I
knew
was
it was
going to
coming.
bring
I
it
knew
up.
that was coming.
Well, yeah, but sorcerer and is based again. Remember, all due credit to Zero, right? Its progenitor in this way, and I'm bringing it up. It and sorcerer, and to a lesser extent, dogs. In that a little bit like Nine Worlds and Marvel Universe, you, but even more so, everybody rolls for what they want at once. Everybody throws in. We have completely separated intent, initiative, and execution. Right? I mean, instead of your turn where you get all of those at once, instead we're separating them completely. Everybody's stated intent independently and without stress or strain. Now we're going to put initiative and execution together. So we're going to roll, and that roll is your order, and it's your execution of the action. What's different, you see, now we're going to bring in a different variable entirely, which is responsivity. Given the order, can you change it up somehow? But that's a different issue, right? How do we get the order, number one? And then number two, how then can we respond? So far in this conversation, and it makes sense, we've only focused on the first, how you get the order. We have not yet talked about ways and means by which you can shift it once it's happened. So right now if we're looking at Nine Worlds in the Marvel Universe and Sorcerer and Zero, at this level, they're the same. Your action to do your thing also sets the order. Right? So everybody's throwing in their mechanic simultaneously to do something. Now we'll look at the results and the order will appear. So it's a very different philosophy than the one of, well, what's my order? Because then I'll say what I'm doing, and then I'll try it at the same time on your turn, which is the sort of the older way of doing it. So that's one, consideration. We're probably moving fairly quickly into the issue of responsivity, right? I mean, now how do we change it? Once we're hit with this order, the order is staring us in the face for whatever reason, in whatever way.
And in Sorcerer, that's fairly static, actually, right? You get your order, and then you're.
Yeah, but the responsivity is to abort your action in order to defend. So you can
Which
change
is
it. It
still
doesn't
not.
really change the order much, but it removes you from the order as an element.
And if I understand it, something like Circle of Hands has a lot more.
Yeah, because you have a
movability
resource to
and
burn.
response.
You have a resource to burn to pop yourself ahead. And then in fourth edition D&D, which I think is not trivial in this regard, and I don't know about fifth edition.
I played a bit. In fifth edition, there's something like you can prepare your action.
Right.
So let's say I roll a fairly high initiative, but I don't know, like my character is far away. So I say, okay, as soon as some of those dark elves pops out of the cover, I shoot him.
Right. Fourth edition has all these things too. Yeah, go on.
Yes. Yeah. So if it happens, I postpone my action, and then I can do it as soon as this trigger happens. But if this character says, I will pop out as soon as she stops doing something. So if they are waiting for some other trigger, for example, and those happen in the same time, then I think there is a dexterity or something roll, like who's faster in this moment to take over to
really glad that you brought this up, because this has long history. The parent of this system is champions.
Okay.
And in champions, you have an ordering by dexterity within a phase. And one of the most important aspects of this, and it was a hole in the system to some extent, was the ability to hold your action, to wait for the trigger, to wait until you say. The point is that once you start holding, you're privileged, right? Because you're going to come in first. The idea is you're readier than somebody who's operating as fast as they can. So the trouble is that people would just hold and hold and hold, and then you would have everyone else holding and holding and holding.
Yeah.
So you enter a subsystem zone where all the ordering just disappears, and now we're all in this another gray zone, which often devolved into shouting. And even though the system technically would have said the order of holding should do the job, right? The order of holding should tell you. And then what if you have this, and then somebody would say, that's just not fair. I've got the same dexterity of him. I want to roll off. Or someone else would shout. You see, you're in that gray zone again. And so I saw that when I was reading the 4th edition rules. I was like, I better look out for these held actions and these triggered actions, because I know the hell you can dive into if more than one character is doing it. If one character is doing it, fine. They're the exception. And everybody knows they're the exception. If multiple characters are doing it, you are all of a sudden in madness if you're not careful. Another thing about 4th edition, and again, I don't know about 5th, is the opportunity to, instead of just holding an action, you're not losing your place in the initiative, you've just chosen to delay it. But in the case of another option, you can actually change your position in the initiative as long as it is lower. You say, I'm going to go, I know I'm 4th in line, or I'm 1st in line, I'll go 4th in line. You just pick a spot and say, okay, I'm going there. But the point is that since the initiative is retained from rounds to round, you can't go back up.
Okay, but it makes it another problem. Like, okay, I move my initiative from 19 to 18, and to 17, and to 16, and it's boring.
Right. Well, that's true, but the reason I brought it up was not to talk about a fine-grained personal tactical effort, but that the whole team can look at their situation, decide the optimal order to go in, and then then if you rolled differently, then you can reorder yourselves. And so that actually is kind of an interesting point. It takes, it's one of those team and use and affect one another features of 4th edition that many people I played with seemed not to know. They would just go in the order they were assigned, and they never realized that they were allowed. They had to sort of lose one phase of really operating very effectively, but they could basically redeploy their team in a much more effective way for their situation if they worked together. And I thought that was reasonably interesting. That's a form of responsivity. You know, the dice told us where our initial reactions are. But now we get to think about it. And the worst that the dice can do is make us lose just a little bit of time to get our act together.
And then you have the decision, is it better to go now anyway? Because I get the advantage of this monster, or wait.
Right, and if the guy's in my face, it's like, too bad, guys, redeploy all you want to, but I got to hit this guy. Right.
Do you know the board game Gloomhaven?
I have not played it.
Okay, so it's a big box, like 10 kilo. Yeah, it's huge. But basically, it does for me everything and even more than D&D. Like, I have this short stories that tells me, okay, GM tells you this cool story why you're going to this quest, and then there's combat. But so the fun thing is there's initiative cards. So you use actions that there's 2 actions and the card has initiative, and you choose your initiative. But there, so that the initiative is fixed. So if I choose 65, I will go with initiative 65, and I can't usually move it. And it's and the monsters has 2 initiative combined to the action they do. So some actions are very good, but they have low initiative.
Right.
And the funny thing is, when I was cooperating with other players, so one guy has this character whose actions were always very early in the initiative. It was interesting to like, okay, should we go as it is or try to swap between rounds?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going low initiative now, and next round you go early initiative next round, so it will be like one after the other. So we'll go
there's a
by
weird
size.
dance here that we kind of need or want something arbitrary to affect ordering
Yes.
that we can't control, because that's
Yes.
very satisfying that your character has to be a little bit, has to live with certain realities that they can't. But then on the other hand, we want to be able to strategize too. So
Yeah,
if we
so
could
in-
just strategize, it would be boring. We would just optimize out every time.
Mm-hmm.
But if, on the other hand, if we're hammered too hard by the ordering system so that you feel frozen
Yeah.
until you can go, there's something in between there that's very functional. I think Zach's right. There's a broad range of function there. But, and technique. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Something else?
I mean, it was fun to know, like, okay, this character always goes very fast, and there is some option that I can go before them. So maybe I use this action that's not very optimal to like work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also it could be also an option in role-playing games. I don't know a game that uses this kind of system, but I think it would be a valid thing in a game similar to D&D combat system.
There's some really interesting trade-offs of options like that are often object-based in tactical skirmish games, where you're moving pieces around on a grid, and the options originally set up for Melee in 1977 have set the pace for this for a long time, mostly based on movement, how much you're going to move and what you're going to do. And that's the only thing I can think of in role-playing proper, designated role-playing. It's the only thing I can think of whereby people sort of look at what you're doing, look at what I'm doing, and try to figure out what we're going to do together. But it's based very much on movement and time. And so we see, that's another dichotomy that we see in the design, whether movement and time are involved going into your action, and then that's going to set when you go, or infect when you go, and whether movement and time are just going to be stretchy and squishy, and we'll see how your action worked out, and then we'll figure out the movement and time that makes sense. Hold on, Zach, because I was just thinking of, this is where Champions runs face first into Captain America's shield. Because you have, if you go by the canonical game, 12 second turns. Each second is a segment. And you get to go on this, and this segment for your character. And within a segment, you go in order of dexterity of everybody who gets that segment. And it is a metronome. I mean, it is just clock, 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 clock. And if you play it that literally, you will find that you are suddenly in hell of deciding when the Hulk super leap lands. Because if it's the Hulk's turn and he jumps over there and lands, and then you say, okay, that was his full turn, his full move, and now it's the next guy's move and he throws a punch on his, you're kind of going, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense at all. The Hulk can't possibly have landed yet. And I do not want to take you into the hell of text in the Champion supplements that tried painfully to make this make sense in terms of plausible movement and time. And just as a contrast in Champions Now, I said throw out the literalism entirely. These are panels. There is no specific time associated with a movement or an action in Champions. It's a panel or a set of panels. And if we show that the Hulk lands here, that means he must have started jumping before we saw him. Too bad. Because we're gonna make time and space do whatever they need to for the Hulk to get that move in at that moment, and that's all there is to it. So you see what I mean by time coming into the situation to affect it versus time being adjusted by what the mechanics say happened.